How to get your podcast episodes to explode. Ever wondered why some podcast episodes explode in popularity? Surprisingly, and again, I mean genuinely surprisingly, most new and experienced podcasters often overlook the impact of episode titles, focusing instead on the quality of the content itself. But think about it. Your podcast episode title will either attract or repel new listeners. Your podcast episode titles will either attract or repel old listeners. When I say old listeners, I really mean, current listeners. When a new listener finds you online, what's going to drive them to take action, to click and listen to your podcast? Your episode titles. When new listeners finish an episode and they check out old episodes, your back catalog, deciding whether to binge or not, what's going to convince them to stick around and binge your content? Your podcast episode titles. Yet most podcasters struggle to write effective titles that grabs attention, turns heads into listeners, because maybe you overthink your title, or maybe you tried ChatGPT and then realized it wasn't that great. I'm hoping you realize that ChatGPT for episode titles isn't that great because it's not. Or maybe you're being lazy with your titles and you put in minimal effort because you don't really think too much about it, right? Which to me is a massive mistake, and I'll get into the reasons why. So look, there's a reason why the top YouTubers spend endless hours thinking about video titles. And there's a reason why creators on LinkedIn rave about focusing on the hook of your post. Creators talk about hook, subject line, how to grab people's attention. Your episode title is literally the first point of contact from you to your current listeners, and you and your ability, your podcast ability to communicate the value of your episode, of your podcast, to convince a total stranger to check out the show. And it starts with your titles. But look, I don't blame you. If you've been lazy, if you're using ChatGPT, if you've been kind of sweeping under the rug and not thinking too much about your titles, I don't blame you, right? There's no real framework out there that's showing podcasters how to create attention-grabbing episode titles that listeners can't ignore. That only leads to generic or overly broad episode titles that fail to capture the attention of the listeners you want to reach, underestimating the power that a title has when it comes to influencing a listener's decision to engage or not engage with your content, and missing the opportunity to connect with potential listeners through search. And again, I'm going to talk about this stuff in just a moment when it comes to being discoverable on Apple and Spotify. These are the platforms where listeners are at. This would be you literally shooting yourself in the foot if you're serious about growth, if you want to monetize, and if you want your podcast to be found and attract the right listeners. And look, when you don't have a proper process in place that allows you to consistently turn strangers into listeners with your titles, you're basically left frustrated, pissed off, pardon my French, seeing episodes underperform, even though and despite having high quality content, interviewing incredible guests, but it not reaching as many people. Unseen potential when it comes to you promoting online because people, again, aren't really paying attention because the episode title isn't attractive enough, isn't crazy, wild, intriguing, isn't grabbing them by the jugular and saying, listen to my podcast right now. You're left scratching your head as to why your podcast growth is stunted and still unaware about how your titles are what's letting your incredible content not get the incredible traction it deserves. But what if there was a way to consistently attract new listeners and retain old ones? What if you could package your content using deep psychology to make your episodes wildly attractive to the listeners you want to reach? And what if you could write titles so intriguing they leave listeners no choice but to click and listen? In just a moment, I'll break down exactly how you can do just that. So look, my name is Anthony Winery. I'm the co-founder of GetMoreListeners.com, a company helping education-based podcasters as business owners, coaches, and experts, podcasters with topic focus shows really, turn a slow growth podcast into a rapidly growing positive ROI show. Over the last 4 years, I've interviewed and coached 350 plus podcasters, and I'm also the co-host of Why Your Podcast Isn't Growing. This generates around $10,000 of attributed sales every single month. Hey, look, this isn't about me. This is about you. So here are things you can't skip over if you want to write wildly irresistible titles. Number one, understand your audience. I know you've probably heard this 1,000 times. I get it. People say this a lot. But genuinely speaking, this is so important to have a deep understanding of your audience. What are their pain points? What are their desires? What things trigger them? Because if you're trying to get someone to react and respond to an episode title, to see your content on social media and therefore take action to listen to your podcast, you have to understand the triggers and what specific pain points they're going through that you can talk about in your title, that you can mention in your title, being specific, that's going to elicit a specific response. And that's them listening to your episode. You also need to employ a strategic title types. That sounds very wordy. Strategic title types. You get the gist. use like formulas, right? Don't get boring. Like use formulas like how to or X ways to or intriguing questions that promise value and provokes curiosity. And again, I'm going to give you some actual examples in just a moment, but it's important that you have specific frameworks. I want to break it down into another level so you have the title that you need to create wildly attractive titles. Number 3, add keywords strategically. You have to optimize your titles for SEO. I'm going to break down what SEO is in just a moment, but again, by including relevant keywords that potential listeners are likely to search for, this really enhances your discoverability. It makes your podcast easily found. You have to do this. This is a must if you want to be found organically by people searching for your content. Podcast SEO, if you're not too aware, is essentially a process of ranking your podcast higher on Apple and Spotify. Yes, you can legitimately rank your podcast higher on Apple and Spotify by understanding podcast SEO, and it comes down to having the right and relevant keywords in your titles that your audience are actively searching for. Apple and Spotify, this is where listeners go to discover a new show to listen to. And when you rank for the right keywords, you're easily found. When you're not optimized for podcast SEO, which the majority of people aren't, listeners won't be able to find you, making it harder to grow and be discovered, right? So again, this is super important, and you have to think about this when it comes to your titles. Number 4, you have to test and iterate. Really, genuinely speaking, you got to stop with the guesswork. I speak to so many podcasters day in and day out. And for a lot of people, because they haven't got the frameworks, because they haven't got the knowledge, because they're just unaware that some things are serious, like the episode titles or podcast SEO, they kind of just guess, hoping that they're going to stumble across growth that's just going to happen. Kind of throwing what at the wall, trying to see what sticks, and nothing ever seems to stick. Even though you're producing high quality content, interviewing the best quality guests, having an incredible solo, whatever you're doing, the content's fine. But if you don't have these strategies in place, if you're just guessing, that's not a strategy. Having fingers crossed and open is not a strategy. So don't guess, follow this and iterate. So test for yourself, see it work, and then iterate based on the feedback you get from your own experiment. If you want to grow fast, get big, and make money from your podcast, you need to have a strategy and a plan. You can't just behave like a hobbyist podcaster. I love hobbyist podcasters who feel like they can just record, publish an episode, and attract the right listeners like magic. They won't come. It just doesn't happen. You've probably experienced this. You have to be intentional. So awesome. Now that we have the principles out of the way, here are the exact title and frameworks you can start using today to turn more strangers into listeners and to permanently keep old listeners coming back for more. Would you like that? Would you like that from me, myself, Anthony, and everything? GetMoreListens.com. Would you like that? Awesome, right? So I'm going to break down types of episode titles, frameworks that you can use, plus examples. So the first one, in terms of super specific titles, when to use them, this is best for educational shows. If your podcast is how to, if you're providing clear instructions, it needs to be something where actionable content is expected. So when it comes to super specific titles, the purpose is to directly address a specific problem or question, and you're promising, again, a specific solution or insight. The whole point is to talk about the pain point they're experiencing, be specific in terms of the pain you're going to help them solve, and be specific in terms of the solution insights they're going to gain by clicking and listening to the episode. Again, we have to sell the listen. This is an example. How to reduce anxiety with 10-minute daily Kundalini meditation for beginners. Super specific. How to reduce anxiety. We know what the value proposition is. We know what problem we're trying to solve. Anxiety with 10-minute daily Kundalini meditation. We know specifically what we need to do or what solution we're going to receive. 10-minute daily Kundalini meditation for beginners. We know exactly who it's for at every stage. So again, how to reduce anxiety with 10 minutes daily Kundalini meditation for beginners. Super specific. For yourself, think about, how can I make my titles a bit more specific? How can I add, specific terminologies? For example, we're also ranking for specific keywords. How to reduce anxiety. People be searching in how to reduce anxiety on Apple and Spotify. They just will, right? Because they're going to be looking for podcasts about this. And now we're ranking for the right keywords. With 10 minutes daily Kundalini meditation. Kundalini meditation, another keyword that's highly searched. And there's a specific keyword, meaning when people search in Kundalini meditation, guess what they're looking for? Kundalini meditation. So we're able to actually have a targeted approach, not just in terms of making a title wildly attractive to our current listeners by being specific, but also when someone discovers us naturally, because not everyone's going to know you. New listeners start off by being strangers. Then they become a listener. Then they become a fan. Then become loyal. Then they pay you, hopefully, or become a client, or however the relationship transpires, right? So for further context, you want to focus on clarity and directedness. Is that a word? Directedness? Directness? Directness. I can't even bloody read. Directness, right? These titles should really remove any ambiguity about what the episode is about. You're just looking again to be super specific. So instead of business, try online business. Instead of online business, try dropshipping. Instead of dropshipping, try dropshipping for beginners. You see, we can get more specific. You want to use this when you want to attract the right listeners searching for your specific solution. Or again, when you can offer a direct answer or methodology to a commonly known thing, like how to reduce anxiety. If you have a specific methodology, add the specific methodology in the title. The next is massive intrigue titles, right? So massive intrigue titles, you could probably make out what it means, but it's essentially massive intrigue titles, right? Making it super intriguing and engaging for your audience. When to use this? So this is really effective for topics that are less straightforward, or where you kind of want to draw listeners in by piquing their curiosity. That's kind of the main objective here. So if you want to just pique your listeners' curiosity, or maybe you're talking about a solution or something in your podcast episode that your audience might not be aware of, or a lot of people aren't aware of, and you want to build some intrigue around it. So the purpose here, again, is to intrigue and entice listeners with something unexpected or lesser known. So sparking curiosity. And this is a massive driver of human behavior. And a great example is at the end of any soap opera or any Netflix series, they always leave you at a cliffhanger because it sparks your curiosity and makes you want to find out more. If you have an extremely intriguing title, people's brains start going on overdrive trying to figure out the puzzle. And for them in this situation, for our sake, them figuring out the puzzle or itching that scratch is them listening to our podcast. So this is super powerful as well. So massive intrigue, here's an example. 5 weird personal finance hacks millennials can use to save their first $10,000, right? Instead of us saying personal finance hacks, we're saying 5 weird. Like, what's weird about these personal finance hacks? Because again, you're trying to deal with the objection when it's massively intriguing of your listeners, right? So instead of just saying 5 ways or 5 common ways or 5 hidden ways, but here, 5 weird personal finance hacks millennials, or being specific as well as intriguing, can use to save the first $10,000. So we can actually mix and blend super specific with massive intrigue just by adding like stuff like 5 weird, 5 strange, shocking, revealing. Words like that tend to get people's minds flowing in terms of intrigue. So again, for further context, you want to use these when the content is unique, or when you have something surprising in terms of the tactics or stories or insights that you share or your guest shares. If you're interviewing someone and they have unique insights or they have an unconventional approach to things, this is an amazing time and opportunity to use an intriguing title. So they work well to differentiate you and your podcast from everyone else out there. And these are great for episodes that might not be straightforward in terms of solution, but offer, like I mentioned, a unique perspective or discussions. Then the final part, polarizing or confrontational titles. And these can be kind of one and the same. So when to use this, you want to use when you're addressing common misconceptions, stirring up debate, or challenging popular belief within your niche. So for me, if I was to do this, I would say why social media doesn't help you grow and what to do instead, how to grow your podcast to 10,000 monthly downloads without promoting a single time. Because I know that most people are thinking that social media is the way for them to grow their podcast. But as well as I know that social media doesn't actually help you grow. So when I have that in, you're like, well, what else can I use to grow the podcast if I can't use social media, right? 3 weird tricks you can use today to add 10,000 new listeners to your podcast in the next 24 hours. By the way, that's complete cap. Like, don't believe any, that's just a title to illustrate. If you saw that as a pitch, I'd run away because it's very unlikely. Again, podcasting requires a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy in order to really make things work. Is it easier with a team and having the right strategies? Absolutely. Are you better off not guessing and having a strategic approach? Absolutely. I've gone on a massive segue there, but the whole point is with this is you want to address misconceptions and stir up a bit of drama. So again, the purpose to engage listeners by touching on a continuous issue or viewpoint that they might have, prompting them to listen for affirmation or a counter argument. You want to elicit a response. Here's an example: why law of attraction isn't working for you and how to raise your vibration to start manifesting. Why law of attraction isn't working for you. Why your podcast isn't growing. That's literally the name of my my podcast, why your podcast isn't growing, because I know people are going to see that and be like, why is my podcast not growing? You know? And that's what we want here. So when it comes to this, be confrontational. Think about the pain points your audience are aware that they have. So if your audience know that they are struggling with, if your audience know that they're struggling with a particular pain point, maybe they're struggling with anxiety, maybe they're struggling with growing their podcast, maybe they're struggling with finding the right relationships, just call it out, you know, why this is a problem for you and here's how to fix it. Be confrontational is going to elicit a response. You're meeting them where they are. This will only work when you're talking about a problem that your audience are aware that they have. So when it comes to polarizing or confrontational titles, so for further context, you know, use these sparingly. You know, you want to have the highest level of impact. So use these sparingly. These are most effective when you want to challenge the status quo or when you're discussing a hot and trending topic that you have a counterpoint to. These titles can be very effective for drawing in new listeners and your current listeners when they have strong feelings or emotions about the subject, or they're acutely aware of the problems you're discussing in your episode title. So here we go. Let's have a quick recap. We have super specific titles. We know what we use that for. Being super specific about the pain point, the desired outcome, the value proposition, and the solution. Massive intrigue. Want to pique people's interest, draw them in, be a bit spicy, be a bit saucy. Don't be boring, be a bit sexy. That's the whole point. That's what we want to do, right? And then, of course, polarizing and confrontational. So call out their pain points, be confrontational, challenge the status quo if that is something that you've addressed in your episode title. So when it comes to actually implementing these, awesome, great, but how do you use this in the day-to-day? You're like, dude, this makes sense. Cool, I get it. The titles are pretty cool video. I see the value, all right. But how do I implement this? And this is what we're going to do. So how do you implement this framework? So when you're crafting new episode titles, analyze your content and then just determine which type of titles best match the content of your episode. You don't want to just make this up and try to be super confrontational all the time because you can't control what your guests will say. So you want to just compare it to what makes sense. So consider the main goal of the episode. Is it to educate? Is it to intrigue? Or is it to challenge status quo? And I kind of have a mix of a lot of these within my podcast as well. Know your audience. I can't stress this enough. Like you for this to work on a fundamental basis, you have to understand your audience. You have to know what they resonate with. You have to know what languages to use to trigger certain emotion for them to take action. You know, like you can't craft an incredible title that's targeted if you don't know your target. So know your audience. And a lot of you listening to this right now will feel like you know your audience and probably have an idea, but really having crystal clarity in terms of what does pique their interest, right? And you can do this by looking at what are some of my most popular episodes that have been downloaded massively. You know, that didn't have like a huge guest or something like that, but it's been downloaded massively. What are some of those? What are the titles? What did I talk about? You're getting feedback constantly from your audience in terms of what they listen to and how long they listen to the episode for. Then you want to test and you want to refine. So again, don't just guess. Like don't guess that's again, it's not a strategy. Regularly test different types of titles and see what performs best. Every audience is going to be different. I can't give you like a clear strategy and framework. For us, if you're just getting started, if you're just trying to just figure out how to make the best titles consistently, just start with being super specific. That tends to be the easiest one to master. So you want to do more of the ones that perform best and less of the ones that don't. It's really that simple. Like, don't overcomplicate this. So what's the actual outcome? So when you have incredible titles that are wildly attractive, you have increased discoverability. So well-crafted title improves your podcast visibility and its organic ability to be discoverable on platforms like Apple and Spotify. Again, that's where listeners are. Ask yourself, what are the search terms I want to rank for? Anxiety, publishing business, online business for beginners. Think about the keywords your audience will search in and make sure to have them in your title to increase discoverability. You have enhanced engagement. So captivating titles that draw listeners in and get them to consistently engage with your content, especially when you're consistently delivering on the promise of your titles. This makes your podcast a go-to resource within your niche, because if someone clicks your episode title and they get what they came for, you create a positive feedback loop. When they see an outrageous title from you, you're not trying to just clickbait to get clicks and people leave and F off. That doesn't work. It just won't work, right? You have to deliver exactly what you promise in your titles. If not, you have lower listen times and that actually affects your engagement. But if you want to improve your engagement, just deliver on the promise you gave in your title and people will be happy. When people are happy, they're far more likely to return. When people return to your podcast month after month after month after month, guess what happens to the growth of your show? You start to grow. So increase recurring listenership. I kind of just went over this and I've spelled attractive wrong here, which is not great. Let's have a look at that. And intriguing. God damn. Look at this. Look at this, guys. Look at me making all these mistakes. Perfect. By the way, expect this. I'm not trying to be perfect here. I'm trying to be amazing, spectacular excellence, but sometimes we make some mistakes. Sometimes we make some mistakes. Anyways, look, when your episode titles are wildly attractive and intriguing, you're able to get more new listeners coming back for more. And when new listeners discover your pod, they are far more likely to binge your entire back catalog, your entire content. And of course, you have increased social media traction, because when you have effective titles, more viewers who see your promotion online are far more likely to engage and listen to the episode. You end up converting more of your followers into listeners. It's just that simple. So all these leads to fast growth, higher engagement, and a healthy podcast that's growing month after month. And remember, again, each episode title is your chance to gain a new listener and keep an old one. So make them count. Take your time to create titles so good, new and current listeners feel stupid ignoring your show. So look, my name is Anthony Winery. This is my YouTube channel. If you enjoy this, feel free to leave a like. And if you want to learn more into what we do, how we help podcasters grow and monetize their podcast, there's going to be a link down below, or just go to www.getmorelisteners.com and find out a bit more about what we do. I'm just going to be honest, it's basically a VSL. It's going to pitch you. But the whole point is to simply walk you through our process. If you like it, great, amazing. You can book on a call with our team. It'll be a quick 15-minute discovery call. And if you didn't like it, at least walk away knowing our process, knowing how we grade shows, and learn a little bit more about us. Regardless, I hope you have an amazing rest of your day.